You know how sometimes you're reading and a single sentence just stops you cold? A line that seems to go against everything you thought you knew. Well, in this explainer, we're diving deep into a sermon by Pastor Yun that tackles one of those exact verses. It's a really powerful, kind of confusing statement about suffering that has had people scratching their heads for centuries. So let's get right into the mystery of what the Bible calls remaining suffering.
Okay, here it is. Colossians 1, verse 24. The Apostle Paul wrote this, and right off the bat, it hits you with two huge, wait, what? Moments. First, he's rejoicing in suffering, and second, he's filling up something that is lacking in Christ's afflictions. I mean, that sounds almost wrong to say, doesn't it? So let's just tackle that first part, rejoicing in suffering. In his sermon, Pastor Yun points out that these two ideas just feel like they do not belong in the same sentence. It totally cuts against the grain of what a lot of us think faith should be, a path to happiness and success. But no, Paul slams them right together, and it forces us to ask, why?
And that leads us to the real theological bombshell in this verse. How on earth can Paul say something is lacking in what Christ did on the cross? This is the central question Pastor Yun's whole sermon is built around, and trust me, the answer is a complete game changer for how we look at suffering.
So what does Paul actually mean by lacking? According to Pastor Yun's preaching, to get this right, we have to be super precise about what is finished and what isn't.
Right? This is the objection that immediately pops into everyone's mind. The Gospels are crystal clear. On the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished." The book of Hebrews goes on and on about how he made one sacrifice for all time and then sat down. The job was done. So, what could possibly be missing?
And this is where getting a little nerdy with the original Greek is so important. Pastor Yun explains that the word Paul uses here, hasterima, it doesn't mean Christ's work was flawed or wasn't good enough, not even close. It means there's a certain amount that remains to be filled. Think of it less like a crack in a foundation and more like a water jug that's meant to be full but isn't there yet. That little distinction changes everything. So this brings us to the absolute core of Pastor Yun's sermon. There are two totally different kinds of suffering. On one hand, you have atonement suffering. This is what Christ did on the cross for our salvation. It is 100% complete, perfect, finished. You cannot add a single thing to it. But then there's a second category, mission suffering. This is the hardship, the struggle, the opposition the church goes through to carry out Christ's mission in the world. This is the suffering that Paul says remains to be filled.
To make this idea really stick, Pastor Yun uses this fantastic analogy. It's all about a king who has just won a major war. Let's see how this helps us get it.
This just illustrates it perfectly, doesn't it? Christ is the king. He already won the war on the cross. The decisive battle is over. Victory is guaranteed. But we, the church, we're his army. He's sent us out to apply that victory everywhere, to go into every town and village. And as we do that, we're going to face some resistance, some small battles. That ongoing struggle, that is the remaining suffering Paul is talking about. It's the hard work needed to bring the king's victory to every last corner of the map. And this whole idea of one person's suffering helping others, it's not some one-off concept that only appears in this one verse. As Pastor Yun points out, this pattern is actually woven all through the Bible. He uses a couple of key examples to show this.
First up, we've got the story of Moses. So the people of Israel build the golden calf, a huge sin, and God is ready to just wipe them out. But Moses steps in.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Moses is so connected to his people that he's basically saying, "Take me instead, punish me." He's volunteering to fill up the suffering they deserve, asking to be erased from God's book if it means they can be saved. It's just this incredible preview of the same principle.
All right, the second story Pastor Yun uses comes from King David's life. He's on the run, hiding from enemies, and he just casually mentions he's thirsty for some water from a well back in his hometown, which, by the way, is occupied by the enemy.
So what happens? 3 of his best soldiers hear this, risk their lives, break through the enemy lines, and bring him the water. But David can't bring himself to drink it. He looks at it and understands that their sacrifice, their life-threatening effort, has turned this simple water into something holy. It's like their blood in a cup. They filled his lack, his thirst, at great personal cost, and it became a sacred offering.
So all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most personally challenging part of Pastor Yun's entire sermon. If this mission suffering is still out there waiting to be filled, what does that mean for us today?
So let's just pull all the threads from Pastor Yun's sermon together, shall we? First, Christ's work for salvation is totally, completely done. Check.
But there's this separate thing called mission suffering that's still going on. And the church, that's us, is called to jump in and participate. This isn't random, pointless pain. It's a sacred job. And this all leads to Pastor Yoon's final, mind-blowing idea, that each one of us is given a personal share, a quota of this suffering to fill up for the sake of the mission.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from Pastor Yoon's message. Think about it. In faith, or really in any part of life where people sacrifice for something bigger than themselves, what does it mean to see hardship not just as a burden to be avoided, but as your own personal quota of suffering that you're meant to fill for a cause that matters? It's a pretty profound question to wrestle with.